Greetings and welcome back to One True Pod, the Athletics Big 12 football podcast. I'm Jason Kersey, joined by Sam Kahn. Last time we had on a Big 12 head coach. This time we're bringing back Max Olson instead. Max, it's much better to have you. I'm sorry.
I'm really honored that you guys would let me come back onto my podcast. I appreciate it.
You know. As I said that, it sounded worse than it did in my head when I was formulating that intro.
I really enjoyed the Lance Leipold podcast. It was a great. We've hit that time of the year, guys, where, especially with having a new baby, like kind of my podcast time is like either driving to daycare or mowing the lawn. So it was a great mowing the lawn pod. I thought the Lance Leipold interview. Great job.
Or you have a pattern in which you mow the lawn? Do you have to go straight up and down? Do you try to crisscross? Do you try to make it look a baseball outfield?
First of all, my lawn's not looking so great, so no one should take any lawn care advice from me. But yeah, I just sort of switch from vertical and horizontal every week. I wish I was skilled enough to do anything but that. What about you?
I like to go just vertical. Just keep it simple. I'm no Adam Kramer. It's not worth posting on Twitter of what it looks like.
I would love to just watch like a live stream of how Adam mows his lawn because his lines just look way better than mine do.
Yeah. I don't know that you can make my lines out. Just as long as it looks all even and it's.
Do you have much of that, Jason? Do you have to mow much?
I pay a guy. I'm lazy. Look, I can do it, and I have done it, but I don't own a mower right now, and also I'm lazy. So, and also, it is hot here in Oklahoma. I don't know if you guys would have any reason to know this. I don't know what it's like in Texas or Nebraska, but it has been brutal the last month or so here in Oklahoma.
Yeah, Sam, how you doing?
Yeah, it's starting to get to that place. About 2 weeks ago, I had said it's summer. Down here in Houston is, and I was in Texas Tech over the weekend. I was at their camp on Sunday, and that thing went from 1 to 4. And when I walked out at 4:15 up that tunnel, I thought I was going to pass out. That's how hot it was.
You probably lost like 10 pounds at that camp.
Yeah. Sonny Cumby actually had to go retrieve a couple bottled waters for me out of the field house because I was not doing well. And we're a little bit closer to the sun. The elevation's a little bit higher at Texas Tech than it is down here in Houston. We're more closer to sea level, so I was a lot closer to the sun than I usually am in Houston. So it was definitely hot, but certainly I wasn't running around like the players. So I survived.
God, are you doing College Station next?
No, I already did. I did their camp. I did.
No, but are you doing State 7-on-7?
Oh, I'm up in the air. So that's Thursday and Friday. And
because I feel like the last time you and I did that, it was a death march.
Yeah. Well, and the last time you and I did that, it was in mid-July. They've moved it up to late
that's
June.
true.
So it's this week.
True.
It's Thursday and Friday, Saturday. So I think I'm going to go out there for a day, but I won't go out there all day. I'm going to have some self-preservation in mind for State 7-on-7, but they moved it up, so it's not at the hottest part of the year, but it's still pretty dang hot right now.
Wow, that is. Look, there's no question. This is what our listeners want to hear about. So
yeah, I know.
I'm glad we're getting into this. What's on the docket today, Jason?
I think what listeners want to hear about is the proposed 12-team college football playoff. How about that, guys? I mean, that when that came out, I was fired up. I don't know about you guys. I think it's great. I think it's awesome. It's also not what I expected. I mean, was 12 really a number anyone was kicking around publicly much? I always thought it'd be 8 or something, but I was a little bit surprised by the 12 number and by how they formatted it.
I was so impressed because I think we're all just sort of like accustomed to. Oh, they're going to make some change. It's probably going to suck in some way. Like it's probably going to be some compromise that no one's totally happy about. So I was really impressed that this was just like a fully baked idea that answers sort of all the questions that come with it. And honestly, I think kind of like does solve like all the problems that we're kind of dealing with right now in college. Well, not all the problems, but I in terms of the postseason, like I really love it. Like you can quibble over certain details, like the sites of second round games being at bowls versus at, home games or whatever. But like I don't know. I mean, what did you think, Sam? Were you pretty impressed by the whole thing, or I guess surprised that this is how it came together?
I was pleasantly surprised because I expect the least from college football leadership. I mean, this is This is a group of people who had resisted a playoff for so long and told us, Bill Hancock told us that a playoff would be unfeasible. And, of course, we eventually got there, but then we got the minimalist form of it with 4 teams, very exclusive. And so I expected it to be 8. I expected it to be 8 teams, 5 Power 5 champions, a group of 5 automatic champion bid, and then 2 at-larges.
Sure.
I am a proponent of 16 because I think every conference champion should get a bid, but I can live with 12. The thing that impressed me the most is that they did not guarantee Power 5 bids. They said the top 6 ranked conference champions. And that to me gives me some optimism, because you look at a year like last year, then you would have had 2 group of 5 teams in it, Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina. So the fact that
and Oregon probably shouldn't have been in it last year.
Exactly.
As a 4-2 team.
I think that's part of the biggest complaint for people who were arguing against an expanded playoff and guaranteeing conference champions is who's your 23rd ranked team that wins a conference championship and gets in. Well, guess what? This guards against that with the way it's formatted. So I like the end result, and I think inclusion is much better when it comes to keeping interest throughout the college football season for the rest of the country.
I think my biggest issue with it, and again, nothing is going to be perfect. I think that we need to go into it saying that. Yeah. It's impossible to make everyone happy.
Well, and to put a fixed number, there's some years when there are, 8 really, really good teams, right? And there's some years when there's just not, and that's going to be the case, I think, with the 12. Some years we're going to say, man, the full deal. This is the first round's incredible. And there's going to be some years when you're like, it's kind of weird that this team got in, but that's part of setting a fixed thing every year,
Well, yeah, how many years have we gone or have we had in the past where the NFC East champion was a stinker and still got in the playoff? I mean, that stuff happens. So you're just going to have to deal with that. My big quibble with it, I think, is the fact that the top 4 teams don't get to host a game at their home stadium. I think that I don't even know how you fix that, because they do get a bye, and that's important. I just, the amount of money that you're going to make from a home playoff game is so large that it kind of sucks that the top 4 teams are excluded from that. And then I guess if you're Notre Dame, it kind of sucks that you can't get a bye. It's impossible to get a bye, but at the same time, I mean, join a conference.
Right.
I'm not shedding tears for Notre Dame, but I will tell you that I think that eventually cooler heads will prevail on the first 4 seeds, because there's no way I don't think we can finalize a version of this with 5, 6, 7, and 8 hosting games and 1 through 4 not.
Let's talk about that specifically then, Jason. When you think about last year, you live in Norman, okay, let's say Oklahoma, the way it would have set up last year, Oklahoma ends up being the 4 seed because they won a conference title. Notre Dame can't be in the top 4 because they didn't win the ACC. So they're the 5 seed. They're playing Coastal Carolina in South Bend, which I think we'd all like to see. Winner of that plays Oklahoma, right? What do you think that would have been like to have a Notre Dame or Coastal, but to have Notre Dame come to Norman for a second round game in a playoff to try and, get to the Final Four?
If it was Notre Dame, I can speak from experience. The 2012 Notre Dame Oklahoma game in Norman is one of the greatest, most exciting, big time, incredible atmospheres I've ever been around. It's probably number 1 in Norman in terms of the games I've covered in Norman. The whole build up to it, the history of the 2 programs, the fact that they don't play very much, but they've got all this history between, who really came up with play like a champion today, who really, Notre Dame's the one that snapped their 47-game winning streak in the 50s. All of that stuff was so exciting, and it was on national TV. Game day was there. It was awesome. And so I think that would have been incredible. But I also think Coastal Carolina would have been cool. They were kind of the hot team everybody was rooting for. Seeing them play a game in Norman, I mean, that would have been huge for their program. I don't know that they would have had a real chance to win that game, but it would have been awesome. And again, just the economic impact of something like that on this area would have been just unbelievable.
And let's remember to compare it to the alternative, which is instead they go play a New Year's Six game against a Florida team that didn't give a shit, and had a bunch of players opt out. And, Dan Mullen said this isn't even, this is our 2021 team or whatever, right? The massive difference when Pitts and Tony and all these guys are playing in a first round game of a playoff, like they're not going to opt out of that. You know what I mean? Like I think that, and I just think that would mean as much as whipping Florida has been great for Oklahoma and their momentum this offseason and all that stuff. Like I just have to think that's way more significant to get a game like that at home versus going down to Dallas to play it.
Well, that's the thing. I know that they want to keep the bowl system intact in some way, and I do understand that from a certain perspective. Those week-long trips are really fun for the players. They get a lot of they get to go places they've never been, play in these big stadiums. But damn, I think it'd be awesome if every round was at home sites until you got to the championship game. I don't know if that's feasible or if that's possible, but I think that'd be unbelievable.
It is. I agree with you. I would be down for hosting semifinals on the home stadiums. That would be an incredible atmosphere if you had, let's say last year, Alabama and Oklahoma in Tuscaloosa, or Clemson and Ohio State in Death Valley. Like that would be incredible. Now, to your point, I don't understand why we can't do this. I don't understand why. Like, yeah. Does the bowl experience really good? Absolutely. I don't understand why they can't live concurrently. People are still going to watch the games. Like the stadiums are not going to be sold out for these bowls, but ratings have showed. We watched that December 23rd, whatever, Dollar General Bowl or whatever it is on ESPN. Yeah. People are tuning into this stuff, so that's not going to change in the era of the playoff. I don't think it will change at all. Now, will more players opt out of those bowls? Sure, but I think that was going to happen regardless of whether you have an expanded playoff or not.
Yeah. No, yeah, there's obviously as we've seen yesterday, like there's hurdles to this still in the sense of got to figure out the Rose Bowl piece of this and sort of like how do we make this transition while keeping everyone happy? There's apparently this sort of talk of like, when can we launch this? I think everyone, ourselves included, is going to be furious if you have to wait 5 years to actually implement this. I don't think that can actually be the case. So certainly curious to see how they smooth all that out. But I am curious, guys, what do you think this setup means for the Big 12? And I think you can start by looking at that and saying, well, what would it have meant for the Big 12? I wrote the piece over the last decade, or wrote the piece about what the last decade of a 12-team playoff looks like in this sport. And in this conference, I mean, yeah, Iowa State gets in last year, obviously, in addition to Oklahoma. But I think the Big 12 actually ends up faring fairly well. They have 17 teams make it over a decade. Baylor gets in 3 times, Iowa State 1 time, K-State 3 times, Oklahoma gets in 7 times, Oklahoma State once, TCU twice. Like, what do you think? Don't you think if you're a fan of the Big 12 or of a team in the Big 12, this format is, really swinging a door wide open to kind of change the perception of the league?
It's huge because I jotted this all down. So based on your piece, Max, which is really good, y'all check that out on what the last 10 years of the playoff would have looked like if there was a playoff with a 12-team format. 2014, you go from 0 teams in the playoff to 2 with Baylor and TCU. TCU gets in as the 11th seed in 2015. You have no teams in 2016. Oklahoma is your 1 team in 17. Baylor gets in 2019. And like you said, Iowa State gets in last year. So what it does is it changes it to where basically right now the Big 12 is Oklahoma or nobody gets in the playoff. That's pretty much what it has been in the existence of playoff. Now you open the door for Baylor, TCU, Texas, teams like that to actually sneak their way in. 2014, K-State would have gotten in too on the back end. So this opens the door for all those other teams in the Big 12 who essentially are out as soon as they lose a game, whereas you can play your way in if you get in that Big 12 title game and win it.
Yeah. And if you lose the Big 12 title game, you can still get in it. And I think
if you're undefeated or one loss, you still got a shot.
Yeah, I think it's tremendous for the Big 12 because like you said, I mean, it feels like if it's not Oklahoma, it's nobody. And I was honestly surprised that Oklahoma State only makes it once. By the way, in the last 10 years, that I don't know. It feels like they've
some
been
years
better
that they
than
come
that.
close for sure.
Yeah,
there's not that many years when Texas comes close, which is a whole separate discussion of this.
We'll get into that. Decade. We'll get into the Longhorns here in a moment when we talk about the state of the program.
I would think that I would have to think that over the course of a decade, if TCU is like getting that validation of being in the playoff. Like, don't you think that totally changes the way kids in the DFW area look at that program and say, yeah, look, I mean, they aren't the traditional power. They were in, G5 leagues in the past, but now I kind of think this is going to, now I don't believe that the reason I think the 12 team format is like ultimately not that harmful to the sport is because I still think Alabama and all them are still going to win the title most times, right? I think the Cinderella run to the national title is going to still be really hard. But I think that it's going to mean so much more. And when you look at 44 programs getting into a 12-team playoff over the last 10 years in this format, I think that's going to do so much more for these programs trying to catch up and keep up than saying, oh, we made a New Year's Bowl this year, and we wanted or lost or whatever. Like, to be able to say, yeah, we're a playoff program now, or we're on the cusp of being in a playoff program more than just once every 4 years. I think that for a TCU, obviously, Baylor would have made it in a few times. I think right now for an Iowa State, if you're Matt Campbell and you're at the door here, like, do you have to leave for huge jobs to be in the playoff if you can kind of keep this thing rolling and have a decent chance of making it in a bunch of years now?
Yeah, I think you're right about TCU is it does change. And I would argue Gary Patterson and those guys have done actually a pretty good job of getting themselves in the mix for high-end 4-star type talent.
They have, yeah.
Against the Oklahomas.
They fought really hard over the last decade to improve their position in terms of like a perception standpoint in the state.
But you get in the playoff a couple of years, I think that nails you another couple of guys. You're not going to all of a sudden overtake Oklahoma and Texas in the recruiting rankings, but certainly it allows you the opportunity to steal more of those guys because there's going to be those guys that say, you know what, I love your program, I love everything you're about, but I want to win a national championship, and I got a better shot of doing that at Oklahoma. And now if you're TCU and you have a seat at the table, and if you're Gary Patterson over the last 6-7 years, I guess not the last 2 or 3, but before that, for a pretty good stretch, he's in that conversation. That team is in that conversation every year. And so that changes. And those players that we're talking about are difference maker players. They're not, you're getting an extra 3-star here. We're talking 4-star high-level kids where every little factor matters. And I think for the Baylors, for the TCUs, and even to a certain extent for Texas, who hasn't been in this conversation, that access matters a lot for them.
Sign up today with BetMGM, the exclusive betting partner of The Athletic, and get a $1,000 risk-free first bet, plus get a free 3-month subscription to The Athletic. Just sign up at betmgm.com/truepod to take advantage of this special offer from the king of sportsbooks. That's betmgm.com/truepod. New customer offer, paid in bonus dollars. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions.
Must be 21 years of age or older to wager. Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia only. Excludes Michigan disassociated persons. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado, Nevada, and Virginia. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-GAMBLER in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. In Tennessee, call or text the red line at 800-889-9789. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. Promotional offer not available in Nevada.
Support for this podcast comes from Invent Together. According to studies, less than 13% of all inventors who hold a U.S. patent are women. Black and Hispanic college graduates patent at half the rate of their white counterparts. But we can fix that by increasing participation in innovation and patenting by underrepresented groups. It would quadruple the number of American inventors and increase annual GDP by almost $1 trillion. Invent Together is a coalition of organizations, companies, universities, and concerned citizens committed to ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to invent and patent. Because the more diverse the American patent system gets, the stronger and more successful our nation will become. What can you do to help diverse inventors patent and unleash economic opportunity? Find out at inventtogether.org. Learn more and take action today.
I know this is a Big 12 podcast, but I think one of the biggest winners of all of this in the same vein is SMU because they're already recruiting really well. Sonny Dykes has done such a good job down there, but now they get 3 or 4 really big time players a year. when they win their conference, which they should in that scenario, they're going to be in the playoff most years, right? I mean, I think SMU.
If you're Sonny Dykes and if you're Gus Malzahn, like you can retire at the place you're at right now.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you can be so successful now with the way this is going to set up that you don't have to be like, man, I really got to take that SEC job just to try and compete for championships. Like you don't have to now.
Yeah, it does. I think you're right. It changes the calculus, I think, more for coaches than it does for players because you have a legitimate path to the playoff. I mean, I think that was, Houston has had this issue every time they've had a successful coach. Kevin Sumlin left for Texas A&M, Tom Herman left for Texas. I think those moves still happen even if you're in a 12-team playoff world, but maybe it takes a little longer for it to happen. Maybe you're able to hold on to a guy for more than 3 or 4 years if you have that access to the playoff and if you're able to get there consistently, because under those two coaches, Houston would have gotten to the playoff.
You're right.
Scott Frost stays at UCF.
Yeah, I think it does change the dynamic at the top of the G5, where I think if you have the top 10 jobs at the G5 level should be like super desirable jobs now. And Dana Holgerson was probably smart to jump on one of them, and I think, and Gus Malzahn certainly was too. He didn't need to. He had all that buyout money from Auburn, but I do think it changes that. And it probably also changes the dynamic from that standpoint too of like, okay, so then why do they need the Big 12? Why does the Big 12 need to expand and add those programs if they can, achieve these gains just by being the best G5 team?
Do you have a better shot at the playoff if you're Texas Tech or SMU right now?
Oh, yeah.
It's not even close.
Yeah, you're right.
So that's where I think the recruiting will manifest itself the most, where, yes, as we were talking about TCU or the upper tier programs in the Big 12 will have a better shot at the playoff, maybe a better shot at recruits. It also could hurt the Texas Techs and the Baylors of the world who are recruiting the same caliber prospect that Houston and SMU are recruiting, because now you can, if you're SMU or Houston, you have that clear path to playoff, and now you probably have a better path there than Baylor Texas Tech does.
Oh, and I think that I just sort of love how this sort of reframes the hope within the sport too, because if you're at Texas Tech, like we'll take that for example, right? The way the 14 playoff is set up, you have to go undefeated, you have to win your conference, and then that's the only way to get in. If you're a one-loss Texas Tech, you're never going to get in. And if you're at Texas Tech, you're also never going to recruit like Ohio State and Alabama and Clemson, right? There's nothing you could possibly do that's going to suddenly make Texas Tech a top 5, top 10 recruiter. So how are you supposed to break into that club? You can't, right? And so I love that, like you look at 08, one of our, the all-time great Big 12 years. Oklahoma would be the 1 seed, Texas would be the 5 seed, Texas Tech would be the 7 seed, and they would all have a chance to like win games, and that would be incredible, right? I love that if you have that one big year, there is a chance to get into this thing and make a run and totally like transform the situation for your program. And I just don't think a 14 playoff enabled that at all. And I think that's why there's a lot of people that just sort of checked out, because it just turns into the Alabama Clemson conversation in November, no matter what.
I'm glad you brought that up, that 08 season, because that's a perfect test case, because you remember how stacked the Big 12 was. At one point, Oklahoma State was in the top 15. Missouri was in the top 15 at one point during that year. And then that Texas Tech team, could you imagine that Texas Tech team with Graham Harrell and Michael Crabtree and all those guys in a playoff? Right. That would have been incredible theater.
They'd be playing an Ohio State team in the first round, which would be awesome to see. Like we'd never get to see a game like that. And even the 08 one's funny too, because you actually get with the way the conference titles set up and all that stuff, you actually get 4 group of 5 teams in that year. So like that would have been an awesome year for the Big 12. You would have had Utah, Boise, TCU, and Cincinnati all getting in that year. So that part of it I can't wait for. Just that there's going to be some really weird years. And there's going to be some years when we're kind of annoyed because they're like, we don't think this team is that good, but they have to fill out 12. Or there's going to be some conference champ that's just not that great that gets in or whatever. But I can't wait for the chaotic part of it. I think is great, and I think that this is the thing the Big 12 should have been fighting for years.
College football is weird. That's why we love it, and it's just going to get weirder, and that makes it even better. So I'm all for it. I do wonder, and we're going to get into TCU here in a little bit, but like, how much would it have transformed TCU's program if they'd made it in 2014? If they had actually made it, I actually think Baylor should have made it over them since they beat them, but that's a whole nother conversation. But if TCU gets in, like a lot of people think they should have, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that transforms their program in a way that we can't even fathom.
Yeah, I think you don't have this little run that they've had the last 3 years where they've kind of not worked out very well. They've struggled under Gary Patterson's standards, not won double-digit games. I think it's a lot easier to guard against that. 7-6, 5-7, 6-4. I think all of a sudden you follow up that 2014 team where you go 12-1, you go 11-2. Maybe you don't have that 6-7 dip in 2016. Maybe you land a couple of big-time stud recruits coming off that 14 signing class, and maybe that sets you up a little bit better. And then now that becomes a trickle-down effect where now you're consistently in the conversation for the Big 12 championship as opposed to we're going to be there every couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, by the way, Jason, when you go through these, when I do this decade of brackets, do you think in this setup, do you think Oklahoma would have won it all once?
Oh man, that's a good question.
Do you think that history has changed a little bit too, potentially?
That's a great question. I mean, what happens in 2017, for example? And I don't have your article in front of me.
So
but who would they have played in 2017?
They're the 2 seed. They would get the winner of Miami Auburn, which is like solid teams, not teams that were.
They would win those games.
We saw Auburn lose to UCF that year. Obviously, Miami lost to Wisconsin, I believe. But Oklahoma still ends up playing Georgia probably in the Final Four. Mm-hmm. And we know that was a coin flip game, basically.
Yeah. Well, and maybe they win a few games, they get on a roll. I mean, maybe that allows them to win. I mean, they were winning that game by 2 touchdowns at halftime. So I mean,
right.
And I still believe that if they'd held on and won that game, I think they would have beaten that Alabama team.
It would have been a fun on the other side of that bracket that year. You have Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, USC, and Penn State, and UCF. Like, it's a pretty loaded other side of the bracket. So maybe they could have gone all the way. It would have been an upset.
I'll also take it a step further, a little alternative history. If OU wins that game against Georgia and plays Alabama, their defense was so bad, Jalen Hurts wouldn't have got pulled. He would have never transferred to OU, and everything's different. So seriously, Tua doesn't come in. Yeah.
Oh no! Correct. It would have been a shootout, and Tua never would have gone in the game.
And Tua would have transferred then.
Maybe he would have transferred.
If Tua does not play in the national championship game, Tua transfers, and he's not at Alabama anymore. I think that was a pretty open secret in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah,
that's fun. I like that. All right, let's. That was any last points on the? Hey, look at that! We got Ari Wasserman here.
Hey!
All right, what are you
doing?
Yeah, I was actually really engaged in this discussion you guys were having. I was hoping you weren't going to call on me because that seemed really fun.
Ari just wandered into our Zoom room. What's up, dude?
There you go.
How you guys doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm just living the dream. You know how it is. I mowed my lawn today, so
I saw that.
That's what we just talked about.
We opened up with lawn mowing conversation to the podcast.
Did you go vertical, horizontal, circles? What'd you do?
It looks like 9 different lawnmowers went in different directions. So like this is only the second time I've ever done it. But we're trying.
It was a group effort.
Yeah, it was something. But I took my shirt off, so I felt like a real man out there. In the backyard when the sun rays hit me, and then came in and had some water. So I know I'm supposed to do it on the weekends and have a beer afterward, but one step at a time, guys. You know how it is.
I'm with you. I'm in the market. Here's how dad mode I am now. I'm in the market for. I want to get me a new trimmer that's got an edger on it. I really want. I want to take that step in my life. I don't know if you guys have those.
I have I don't know what an edger is, but I don't know if it's the same thing as a weed whacker.
It's basically just pointing the trimmer down and cleaning up the sidewalk.
Yeah, so I got a motorized, electric lawnmower, and then I have a weed whacker that takes the same battery. So
wait, what brand you go?
Ryobi. It was
okay,
and I called it Ryobi the first time, and people were laughing at me. But I'm taking a lot of big steps into dad world right now, and I'm tripping a lot, but I'm enjoying it.
You're as the coaches say, you're drinking from the dad fire hose right now.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, our second time talking about lawn mowing was really fun, but let's get to why Ari's actually here. Ari, you wrote one of the latest Big 12 State of the Program pieces for The Athletic on TCU, a program that we were just talking about has had a really interesting stretch here where they get within, a few points of the playoff, and now they've fallen off a little bit, but I think there's some optimism that things could turn back around. So just start off. What was your conversation with Gary Patterson like? What do you think about the TCU program now that you've kind of dived into it?
Well, first of all, that guy's really interesting. He's an interesting guy.
Yep.
We got into his scuba diving passion and his country music, and I went and listened to the song, actually. I'm not a big country guy, but it sounded legit. Sounded pretty good.
Sounded professional. Yeah.
But I think that, and you guys have been doing this long enough to know what I mean, but when a coach is confident about what he has, you can almost sense it in just their temperament a little bit. And I think that, if you're a TCU fan or somebody who's been paying attention to the program, you know this is a critical year, and you guys are the experts here on this stuff, so I'm not, I'm just trying to sound good enough for the lessons you gave me on it. But I went and I looked back, and they were 18 and 17 overall over the past 3 years, and before that they were 40 and 13 in the 4 years before that, and shared a Big 12 title. So I think that this year people are hoping that TCU will get back into that mix, and maybe this will be a different discussion, and I always hijack these podcasts and then change it a little bit. But to me, as a casual fan of the sport, it seems to me that the Big 12 games are usually more competitive and closer than other Power 5 conferences. And when you go back and you look at the way that TCU has performed in the last few years, there's not like they're getting blown out. They're losing a lot of close games. Right. And when you look at the conference as a whole, there's just a lot of close games. I feel like if you look at the gambling spreads, it's always three points for every game every week, except for the one that Oklahoma's involved in,
or the one Kansas is involved in.
Yeah, that's true. And watch out for the spread when both of them are involved.
Yeah.
But it just seems to me that they have a very deep team talent wise. There aren't a lot of weaknesses that you can look at the roster and say, hey, they need help here. And, the offensive skill talent is kind of off the charts in comparison to where it's been in the past for them. And I think you can just trust Gary Patterson's going to have a really good defense. So, to me, when you look at the schedule, it seems like they've got a really brutal start. They have to play SMU early on. They've got California, which is improving under Will Cox. And then their opener in the Big 12 is Texas. So I think that the way that they start, is going to be a big thing. And by October 16th, when they play Oklahoma, you're going to know whether this team is good or not. So, I think it's all there on the table. You look at rosters, you do these state of the programs, you know which teams are in trouble just by looking at it. And they have a lot of returning production. But on the other hand, too, there's a lot of super seniors, a lot of returning production for a lot of the teams in this conference. And it's just really hard, in my opinion, to go undefeated in the Big 12.
For sure, and I think that for me, once again this year, and I said it last year, but TCU is still just kind of the wild card team in this conference in terms of, we saw it last year, they could beat Texas, they could beat Oklahoma State, on their best days, they can kind of play with and beat anybody. But it just, for whatever reason, and you could go to sort of offensive scheme stuff, or, there's lots of stuff you can sort of nitpick, you can go to injuries and depth and some of that, but it does feel like it's not a lack of talent over the last couple of years. It feels like they have underachieved for what they've been working with. But maybe that part of that is just, everyone in this league has to play 6 really close games. And, the years when you go 3-3 in those, then you may end up closer to 6-6.
Yeah, you look at TCU's schedule right now, and you look and you see SMU, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma in a 5-week period. But then you look at the back end and you say, hey, they've got West Virginia, Kansas State, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and then 2 weeks later, Iowa State. And all 5 of those games, I think, would be a 4-point or less spread. And it's you have to be really, really good to get through those games without losing. And it's just kind of an interesting thing because TCU in the past, like you said, what are they, 7-1 against Texas or 7-2 against Texas in the last 9 years? And then they turn around and they lose weird games that they shouldn't lose. And, finding that consistency and the ability to get through a schedule and win the close games is the difference between a 5-loss season and a season where you might be in the conversation for the Big 12 championship at the end of the year.
So where do you come out on them after going through this? Do you think this is a 8-9 win team that has a chance to go to Arlington, or are you... Do you kind of or have we reached a point after a few years now of sort of see it when you believe it, maybe err on the side of caution of a more of a 6-7 win kind of season?
Can I ask you guys this? When you did your state of the programs, do you find yourself buying into the team that you're writing about?
I find myself a little bit, if they're convinced that they're good, then I'm a little bit more convinced that they're good. But you have to temper that, I think.
Yes. So, because I want to temper myself a little bit, like you said, but I did Maryland as well, and I believe that I was buying.
They're going to the playoff, huh?
No, I'm buying. Well, they're actually recruiting really well, and don't get me started on that train. But I bought way more into TCU than I did to Maryland, and I know that those are completely different programs in different parts of the country that aren't recruiting the same, and there's no similarities whatsoever. But I felt like, wow, this team has a chance to be really good when I was done with the call. And then when I did the stats and I looked at the roster, and the thing that I think is most exciting about TCU, and I know that a lot of the comments that I got on the story was, well, their coaching on the offensive side of the ball is going to get in the way, and they won't be able to get to where they need to be. But they have a really good chance of scoring points. And in this conference, if you have a defensive coach like Patterson with the reputation that he has, and a team that can score 30, 35 points a game, you have a chance to do some good things. So, I don't know that I believe that they're going to be a playoff contender this year by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that everybody who plays TCU is going to have to, have that circled. And, the quote that we got from what others are talking about, right, Max, was about, how talented they are all the time. And I think that's a testament to Gary Patterson, because the recruiting rankings, for the most part, they've had top 25 classes here and there, but they had a class in the 60s, I believe, a few years ago. And they always look the part, which means that they're very good talent evaluators. They've got really good developmental, situations there, but it hasn't translated into functional offense. So, if the pieces are in place, you have to kind of feel good about it, but there is kind of that thing of like, can they get the most out of what they have?
On the offensive front, I really like Max Duggan. I liked him last year. I know he's had his ups and downs and he's had his health issues and things, but I really like Max Duggan, and I think he can be a very good quarterback in the league. I like Zach Evans. I think they've got some really talented receivers, as you wrote about. I guess
Quentin Johnson, I think, is going to really take a nice step this year.
I really think they've got a chance to be pretty good on offense. So.
Yeah, and J.D. Spielman, the Nebraska transfer, who was, that guy was really good from what I remember, in my time in the Big Ten. So, the pieces are in place, and I cannot wait to see the Zach Evans show. I know they've got 3 running backs that they're really excited about, but, he was one of the best running back prospects in recent memory, especially out of the Houston area. So, to put him on the field, and, those are the types of players that programs like TCU really need and really need to hit on. Because getting a top-tier 5-star running back is a really, really huge accomplishment. I don't think people realize this, but 5-star prospects are 5-star prospects, but it's really hard at certain positions to get that distinction, and running back is one of them, because they use those positions as a way to correlate where those positions are also selected in the NFL draft, which is why you don't see a lot of 5-star centers and guards running around. So he is a legitimate prospect that was productive in his freshman year and has a chance to be really, really good. And, we've seen in the Big 12, Bijan Robinson, I think, is going to – I've been obsessed with that guy since I saw him look like a Greek god when he was 17 years old. But there are a lot of really good running backs in the league. And I think that having a legitimate runner to go along with Duggan, who, funny enough, led the team in rushing last year, put that together with some of the receivers, their offensive line seems to be in pretty good shape. They should be able to score.
If you're smart about how you use them, you got a real good chance. I think I'm a little bit less high on Duggan than Jason, but I think if they cut Zach Evans loose and they're smart with how they use Duggan in the run game, I think they can really cause some problems for opposing defenses. I think I agree with you, Ari. I think they really got a chance to be good, and I think they got a real good shot of being the team outside of Oklahoma and Iowa State that flirts with a berth in the Big 12 championship game. But a lot of it, I think, hinges on Duggan.
It's funny enough, the hardest thing to do in coaching is what? It's to get the guys. That's the hardest thing. They have the guys. So, I know they have some staff changes that on the offensive side, but the person who's going to be calling the plays this year was also the same person who was calling them the year they almost made the playoff in 2014. So, the game has changed in the 6 years since that's happened, but you have to, kind of give somebody the benefit of the doubt here. And they have a lot of veteran coaches on this roster too, in special assistant positions and analyst positions that hopefully can kind of help them put the pieces together.
Well, thanks so much, Ari, for joining us, for hopping on to talk a little bit about the Horned Frogs. And that actually leads us right into our next state of the program that we want to talk about. And it's one that ran on Wednesday this week. And that was Sam's state of the program about the Texas Longhorns in the first year of Steve Sarkisian. I think it's a program everyone is interested in to see what happens. Is Texas back? It's the same conversation we have every year. But it's a worthy conversation. And Sam, I was blown away, and I told you this before we started recording. I knew this, but I just seeing it in your story kind of blew me away. 101-16 from 2001 to 2009, 78 cents. I mean, that is a pretty stark turn.
Yeah, that's...
Did you say turd? It sounded like you said turd.
I had turn.
Texas fans would also call it a turd.
Hey, you know what?
Turd.
If the shoe fits.
Yeah, I mean, they've gone 11. The last 11 seasons, they only have one double-digit win year. It was 2018 when they went 10-4 and went to the Big 12 title game, lost to Oklahoma, and then won the Sugar Bowl, which we remember Sam Ellinger said, "We're back," and then they went 8-5.
Huge miscalculation.
They went 8-5, 7-3, and Tom Herman's out of a job. So, yeah, that's the thing. So we're here now. Steve Sarkisian is the fourth head coach that they've had since they went to the national championship game in the 2009 season. Of course, Mac Brown was still coach then got run off and pushed out in the end of 2013. Then they went to Charlie Strong. He got 3 years. Tom Herman got 4 years, and now we're on to Sark. And I feel like we're just in this cycle of they're just going to keep doing this until they land on the right guy, until they land on the guy that gets them back into a conference championship game, into the college football playoff, assuming that we get this expansion done in a few years into the college football playoff. But this is essentially what it is. It is a cycle of change until you find the guy. And the question is Sark the guy? That's what everybody has asked me this offseason when I've gone around to trips, from Lubbock to Fort Worth to, wherever. Is Sark going to get it done? I got no clue, and neither does Texas. This is just a bet that they're making right now, spending $34 million on it to try to see if it works. And ultimately, it's going to...
In a place like Texas, they will have made up their mind after like year 3 if he's the guy or not.
And that's the thing. And so my thing always is with Texas is, are they going to allow him to do the job the way he wants to do the job, or are there going to be too many cooks in the kitchen like it usually is? So if you let him do what he needs to do, then yeah, I think they've got a chance to be pretty good. It all comes down to recruiting and quarterback play. And if they recruit at a high level and they have a really good quarterback, then you've got a shot. And that's been the thing is throughout their time in this last decade of being lost, they have recruited well, but they haven't always had a great quarterback. And then they finally got a good quarterback, but then they started having some other issues within the program, and it just became unsustainable at the end under Tom Herman. So they've got to get everybody aligned. You've got to have really good recruiting, and you've got to have a good quarterback. And I think with this expanded playoff, this is a team that can get in the mix if they can generate some momentum here in the couple years. And the thing is, Sark has taken over a job that is not a rebuild. They were 7-3 and lost 3 close games last year. They should be pretty good. I don't think they'll win the Big 12. I don't think they'll even get in the Big 12 championship game, but they should be at least a team that's kind of in the conversation toward the end of the year. If they can generate some momentum, if the playoff starts in 2023, this should be a team that is in that conversation.
So I'll just come out and say it. I think they're like a 7, 8, 9 win team this year.
I agree.
I don't think they're on the same tier as the top 2. I think TCU and Oklahoma State are maybe competing to be that number 3 spot. I don't know. I'm not sold yet that Texas has a chance to finish third in the Big 12 this year. And look, they did last year, right? Like they're really close last year. But I specifically, Sam, does it? Let's start at quarterback. Does it matter?
Yes.
I think Card's the better guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure Card's going to win the job. I think Card's the better player. What are your feelings kind of coming out of reporting this piece and sort of like weighing the upsides here of like where do you think they're going to go there, and how much does that affect the ceiling?
That's the question, because if you go Card, Casey Thompson's transferring, right? I mean, there's no way Thompson's staying if Card's a starter.
I think it's true both ways. I think whoever doesn't get the job is liable to transfer.
It could go the other way too. And if that's the case, then you're in trouble because you have no depth at that point. You have Charles Wright, your 3-star true freshman, who you just signed, from locally from Austin. That's your only other scholarship quarterback on the roster. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. And I will say, coming out of spring, I thought both of them were all right, and I thought both of them had some really, really bright moments. I thought both of them were really flawed. If you made me pick one today, I'd probably pick Casey Thompson, but I agree with you. I think Card is probably the higher ceiling.
Are we talking about what we think they will do or what they should do?
I'm saying what I think they will do. Okay. I think Hudson Card has the higher ceiling of the two. I think from a pure talent standpoint, he made some throws that I saw that it was just really impressive to me. But Casey seems to have, he seems to have a grasp and an understanding, I think, that only comes with being a college player for a couple of years. So I think what he will do is I think he'll start Casey Thompson if I'm betting today. But again, they still got to go through camp, and Sark made it clear that he hadn't had enough time to declare a starter, and that eventually when they go into fall, they'll play this thing out. And there's no doubt he's going to hedge his bets as long as he can to keep both guys on the roster. To me, ultimately, yes, it does matter, but I think what matters more is how you use Bijan Robinson, because that's the star of this offense. If there's one thing you can hang your hat on, is that guy on Saturday is better than just about any other player on the field most Saturdays that they play.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's true, and that came out at the end of the season. And also, can you block for him, right? Can you get that O-line right in a place where, obviously Kyle Flood's very good at his job, but do they actually have the pieces to put together a line that isn't flawed?
Yeah, they've got a lot of returning talent back, and they've got to figure out the pieces. Like where does Derek Kerstetter line up? He's played every position there is. Up front, where is he going to be out at your left tackle? How's that going to work out? Where are the rest of the guys going to line up? Jake Majors probably ends up being your center. How is he ready? Is he going to be good enough, to take on the full-time role, in the middle there? Those are crucial questions that you have to answer. But I will say they feel pretty good about where they are defensive front, at least on the defensive line. In the interior, they feel pretty good with the depth they've got there. They certainly had to take some transfers at linebacker, but Sark feels a lot better there than he did coming out of spring. Coming out of spring, they were a little worried at linebacker, but they feel a little bit better now where they are with some of the guys that have come in, and then Dayoe comes back, so that helps. And then the back end, I think they feel pretty good about. So I think overall this team is pretty talented. It's just I agree with you though. I think they're moderately better than they were last year. I don't see them as a favorite to get to Arlington this year.
Oh, I don't know if they're better than they were last year. I'm not even quite sure I'm there yet. And I'm not saying that's just about like Sam Ehlinger and the guys that lose. I just kind of think that we don't know. They were just such an unpredictable team last year that played a ton of close games. And this is a group of players that's going through another coaching transition that went through nearly a total staff change last year and now is being asked to learn something new all over again. And as we've seen, unfortunately, with Texas over this decade, there's been a lot of cases of the coach coming in and being like, yep, these aren't my guys, got to recruit my guys. And that kind of leads to year one being bumpier than it should have been.
So Sam, you think that after he's going to have 3 years to be impressive, basically. Mm-hmm. That's sort of your read on the situation.
Yeah, I think by year 3, you better be contending for something. You better be a Big 12 champion. In the Big 12 championship, you better be, like I said, if we start the college football playoff 12 team in 2023, you better be in that mix. That's the way I see it.
See, and I just think, I don't know how you guys feel about this. I know that it's Texas. I know everything is so big. The expectations are huge, and they've been so mediocre for so long. But I just don't understand continuing to do that. I mean, I still think, and I think I've said on this podcast before, I don't think Tom Herman should have got fired. I didn't think that was fair to do after a pandemic year when they were so close. I don't know. I just think they keep getting in their own way. And if they do this again in 3 years, they're just setting themselves back again, right? I don't know. I guess unless it completely tanks.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it is a vicious cycle that they're in. I mean, I think on Herman, I think they were kind of without a choice at that point. Once they got to December, I felt like the vibe around the place was just not right. And I think they were kind of at the point of no return in that regard.
It was already kind of lame duck
status. It really was. It really was. And so, like, I agree with you on the results. Like, the record wasn't bad. 32 and 18 is not bad over 4 years.
Nope.
And they lost 3 games, again, by a possession or less. And so I don't think they were bad last year. And that's why I say this is not a rebuild. But something was just off at the end there, and I think that's why they ended up having to move on. And certainly once Del Conte came, and once they made the flirtation with Urban Meyer, and Del Conte came out with the "This is our coach," the statement, non-vote of confidence, you kind of move on. But back to your point is, yes, as long as you continue this vicious cycle, again, like I said at the top, we're gonna keep doing this until they land on the right guy. And we talked about this
but
before.
It's such a ridiculous cycle. It's like,
it is.
Because you're like, man, why haven't they figured it out? It's like, because they keep blowing it up, obviously.
Well, and
right?
they're chasing something that I think is almost impossible to attain.
Right.
101-16 over 9 seasons is rare air. I mean, they're chasing Nick Saban and Alabama type stratosphere, and it's admirable to try. And I understand why they try, because they generate more revenue than any college football program in the country. They are in one of the most advantageous recruiting bases in the country, in the state of Texas. They have more resources at their disposal than just about anybody. So I get why they do it. But the bottom line is that in the last 4 decades, 101-16 is the exception, not the rule. But I think they try to treat it like it is the rule, and that's why they're in this cycle.
Well, and Sam, you know from the other program that you cover closely, like, I think it's pretty comparable, sort of like A&M end of Sumlin and Texas end of Herman. I mean, recruited good players, sort of like bumped into the ceiling a little bit, had obviously high level success, but also sort of lost the confidence that you're going to be able to take it above 8 wins or whatever, right? So what did they do? You give it to Jimbo, and you just leave him the hell alone. Let him do his thing.
That's right.
Like you would think that is, look, people will make up their mind about Sark and Austin within the next couple of years, obviously, but part of it, don't you have to just say, like, all right, let's put the trust in this person and let them recruit the way they want to recruit and build the way they want to build, and just stay the hell out of their way.
Texas wants to win Texas's way. And that comes back to bite you in some instances, as we saw last year. Like you said, Texas A&M gave the keys to Jimbo Fisher and just let him drive the car. And that's it. He's got full control of everything. They do everything his way, and so far it's gone pretty well. I don't see Nick Saban and Alabama getting bothered by what boosters say and getting caught up in doing this, that, or the other, running your program a certain way because of what some of the high-level boosters want. Certainly that is a factor at just about every university, but if you want to win at Alabama's level, maybe you should probably treat your program and run it like Alabama does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, they hired a guy who's, been there, seen it.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the question. So does he get that? And if he gets that freedom, if he gets that control, and doesn't have too many people in his ear, then I think you've got a chance, because I do think he's going to call plays, which is his best asset as a coach. He's a really good play caller. I thought he did a really good job with that offense. Some of the RPO that they did at Alabama last year was pretty magnificent. I actually went and saw him speak at the Angelo Clinic down in San Angelo last week, and it's fascinating. Like, he's really impressive. He's super sharp, and I think once they have the pieces that he needs offensively, I think they're going to be really, really good offensively. The question is can you sustain it over time? And again, it goes back to recruiting. And to me, it's less about good recruiting, which I think they've recruited really well. It's about, can you box out Alabama? Can you box out Ohio State? Can you beat Jimbo Fisher for some of these high-end 4-star and 5-star guys that Alabama and Ohio State pluck every year? The Garrett Wilsons of the world cannot get out of Austin. You cannot let Quinn Ewers go to Ohio State. Those are the wins that Steve Sarkisian needs to win. So in order to win at that level, those are the wins you have to get. It's not, okay, we get a top 10 recruiting class. No, you've got to get those guys if you're going to get back to where Texas wants to be.
Well, as we also learned from Tom Herman, when you recruited that top 5 level, not all of those guys are can't-miss guys that are ranked super high, too. So there's got to be and I think Lincoln Riley's done an awesome job at this, and you see the results. But the evaluation piece and actually like getting, legit players, that will put in the work and, are highly motivated and all that. Like, that's a piece of this too that Alabama and Oklahoma and others do really well. And Texas, I think, has come up short over the last few years.
is Steve Sarkisian analyzing player urine? That's what I want.
I haven't been in the facility,
so
in the
building. We haven't seen.
I was going to say, we
Yeah.
haven't had in-person access at Texas, so I haven't been able to go into the bathroom at Moncrief, which I don't know if anybody can go in the bathroom at Moncrief because it's under construction. But
Very good question.
But that was where. Yeah. By the way, Jason, I don't know if you know that, but when in Moncrief, like right down the hall from where the press conferences happened, when we went to press conferences, that was where we went to the bathroom, and so that's how Anwar Richardson and all of us saw that because it's posted right there on the bottom of the first floor. Is the urine chart and Area 51 and you are a bad guy. Like also, has anybody ever asked, is the bad guy, does he have to go to the hospital? Does he need dialysis? Because that color was very troubling.
Yeah, well, I do have to say, the references you're making and saying Moncrief, none of those words mean anything to me because that is the one Big 12 stadium I've literally never been to a game at Texas, and I never will probably. So
you know what? Hey, funny story. I've never been to Red River.
This year, man.
I know. We need to have it happen this year. I even asked in my last job. I asked to go one year, and they sent somebody else, and I was not happy. So.
Greatest atmosphere in college football.
Yeah, we should get Dave on the pod sometime. That'd be fun.
We really should. No, well, it wasn't Dave that they said. It was Dave and I both asked one year, and neither one of us got to go. So
man,
we do need to get Dave on the pod soon. But no, here's the bottom line on Texas. Is I think, Max, you and I disagree on this year. I do think they'll be a little bit better. And I think in a large part because I think Sark's going to be smart enough to give the ball to Bijan Robinson.
And I'm not saying they can't be, right? Yeah. It's more a skepticism than a like.
No, I understand.
I don't think the ceiling is low for this team by any means. It's just how far can you actually put it? How much can you put it all together right away here?
I think Oklahoma and Iowa State are 1-2 without question.
Yeah.
And then 3, I think it opens up. And we talked about it earlier in the episode. I think TCU has got a really good shot to be that third team. And I'm not really going to pick Texas above TCU until Texas beats TCU consistently, which they have not. They've lost 6 out of the last 7 to Gary Patterson.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense to pick them. But that said, I do think 8-4 is possible. I think it's probable. I think if they go 9-3 or 10-2, and I think if they are able to sneak into Arlington, I think you treat that as a huge win as a Texas fan. I think that's a huge first step for Sarkisian. Can that happen? Possibly. Who knows? But I do think they're an 8 or 9 win team probably this year.
And the other side of that is if they go 7-5 and they're playing in the damn Texas Bowl again, then hopefully people can maybe like have an ounce of patience and not just be like blow it up again. You know?
Yeah. That'll be interesting to see. I don't know, but there's certainly. What's going to happen to the motto "all gas, no brakes" if they're 7-5 and playing the Texas Bowl?
Yeah, they're setting themselves up for some puns here down the road. That is true.
Well, look, I mean, I covered Arkansas guys when Chad Morris got that job and said in his opening press conference they were going to put the hammer down and get in the left lane, and we all saw how that worked out. So sometimes those metaphors are a little tortured.
Look,
I think.
You still have to put the hands on the wheel, and Chad just didn't put the hands on the wheel. He floored it, but
yeah,
it was all over the place.
Crashed right into a tree. No, but I think they'll be a solid team. I think that they have a chance to show improvement. I think Sark will be good enough to give the ball to Bijan, which I don't think they did enough of last year at Texas. Yep. And I think defensively they're good enough up front, and they'll be good enough on the back end that I think they'll have a chance to be a solid team. But I don't expect them to go to Arlington. But I wouldn't be shocked if they were able to sneak in there and get a spot at the end of the day.
And that's fair. That's fair.
Well, guys, this has been a great return to One True Pod. Thank you both for joining, and thanks to Ari Wasserman for hopping on with us to talk a little TCU.
That was a fun cameo.
That was great. We need to have him on more often. And thanks to all of you for listening. Please subscribe to our show, One True Pod, on Apple or Spotify. Leave us a review and a good rating, and find all of our stories on The Athletic, including those states of the program that we've talked about. If you're not yet a subscriber to The Athletic, you can sign up with our latest promotional offer at theathletic.com/OneTruePod. You don't just get the best college football coverage, you get all of our sports coverage. So be sure to take advantage, and we'll talk to you next time.